So I'll keep going in English. I don't know how much of the audience are internationals, but just keep in mind, even though the presentation is English, but if you would like to chat in Turkish about the presentation, just feel free to drop me a message, or just you can come and visit our booth, which is in the main area. As customary, I'd like to thank Mobidictum for hosting the event. To be honest, I didn't expect to be on a stage of this size, so many thanks, and also thank you for coming in. My name is Alaz. Don't have my name written here, but you've probably seen it before this slide. And I'm VP of Business and Strategy at Alictus. A bit introduction of myself. I've started to work here since the past 1.5 years. Before that, my background is mostly on corporate finance and investment. So I'm technically a finance strategy business guy. And what we are going to discuss today is a vision of a business model that we developed, and that can think that the next phase in the hyper-casual can be primarily driven by both the capabilities of everyone has gained throughout their years, the experience, even on the developer or the publisher side in the hyper-casual space. And also we are going to talk a bit about the headwinds and how it actually impacted our lives, and the necessity of maybe revisiting the business model that we all know of, specifically when it comes to the conventional hyper-casual business. So I'm probably sure that everyone knows Alictus, but this is us. So basically, we're a hyper-casual developer publisher, active in hyper-casual space since 2019, but the company had roots back in 2013, a couple of other businesses in the gaming space. So I really like this picture. I mean, why not everyone is smiling and stuff? So this is a pic that we took back in March this year of our offsite. One important event, we've joined forces with a company called SciPlay. You probably know them. They're the top 2 players in social casino business worldwide. And I'll also briefly mention the strategy of how 2 companies that joined forces and build a new business model on top of what everyone does the best in its own respective areas. Cool. So what to expect from today's presentation is to a discussion around the evolving business model. So for anything related to product and everything else, we can have a deeper conversation after this one, but I'll specifically focus on how to win and what will be the next step that we can think of. So we're just going to very briefly touch upon how casual and hyper-casual evolved in time, and just set the ground, and then we're going to discuss the hyper-casual industry stands today, and then I'll briefly discuss the casual hyper, the term we coined with SciPlay, back in this year when we started the discussions, and if it's going to be a win model for the hyper-casual of today's world. So let's go. Very basically, the casual playbook has been, long in the market, but it evolved. When I first started to work at Alictus, I was just digging through how the industry has responded to the changes happened. The technology has changed drastically, the way we look at it, and also the data, how we monetize. And the reach of audience has broadened with the adoption of every technological stance. But one thing remained the same, is the simple and core gameplay. It didn't change. It actually carried over through all of those technological stances. For example, lots of games just carried over from Facebook, reached a wider audience in the smartphones. My perception is it actually taps into a certain urge of fun with the audience, and it was able to reach even a wider player base when it had this transition from social network to smartphone, actually. And it evolved into a different kind of a business model where companies have found room to grow exponentially. So as an extension of this, the hyper-casual is born. First, it was a product, actually. So just an even simpler, a catchy gameplay. But what made it a successful business model is the other enablers that the industry have found later. So it's more data-driven, the monetization model has changed. It was actually tailored to a gameplay that was, very shorter sessions, let's say. The whole prototyping and the production was based on very quick feedback loops, and concept discoveries were mostly based on also trendy topics. It doesn't have to be a trend topic from the social media, but overall a concept that has a broader reflection in the player base. So this and turn into a business model, as said. So we all know how it is at the moment, but just to go through them, the barriers of entry is pretty low, specifically for the developers. Actually, it had been low. because the world was growing, everything was a bit greener, specifically on the hyper-casual funding side. So the publishers or the investors that had the money was more able to flow their cash into new, let's say, entrepreneurs. So the barriers of entry was specifically when you're starting a business was low, but still the development cost and everything else is comparatively, let's say, lower than the casual business. Low LTVs compensates the low CPIs, able to scale massively. But it also happens to, so the value chain is a bit different than the traditional casual business. So it's then happened the current conventional publisher-developer relationship. So where the abundance of developers still working with a number of publishers, but right now it formed a red ocean type of a business. So the developers and publishers have found themselves a certain focal areas that they can exploit their potential and just have a specialization that they can build more capabilities, both in terms of product and the data on top of that. So once they did it very good, they won. Once they couldn't make it, specifically the current status of the overall, the macro drivers and everything else, we expect a correction in the market that is actually evident and has to happen in the recent future. So you'll probably know a lot of those stuff, so I'll just quickly jump in and describe. So one of the stuff is that the engagement is started to a bit impacted by the COVID-19 easing, and you know the story, the COVID happens, engagement on the mobile has increased significantly, it hasn't dropped, but it's not growing as faster as it used to be. So this is one of the main challenges that impacts the current engagement profile of the industry. Not only happening in hyper-casual, but also happening in any other maybe entertainment, let's say specifically mobile entertainment business. So this is, people usually very careful about using the term recession. Let's say economic challenges. This has been happening, was actually an impact of COVID, but specifically even in the Western markets, the economies are struggling to grow, actually not grow, but decreasing. So very basically, when this happens, investments stop, people have, let's say, so the unemployment rises. When the unemployment rises, the consumer spending drop. And when this happens, brands, companies, the technology companies, everyone else is more careful with their marketing spend. The data shows that it hasn't happened yet. So even the first half of this year, the ad spend, specifically in the US, has increased, but very tiny bit. If I remember correctly, it was 1%. But the marketing spends are too easy to adjust. So when this happens, if no one else is willing to spend more money on your product, even though it's like a tangible or a technological product, companies can quickly adjust their marketing spend, and it's already started to impact on a certain level, but it's even further have an extension and an impact over the current ad mon and UI landscape. And finally, this is an industry-wide impact. So ATT happened, you know the story. First, the impact on iOS kind of had a spillover impact on Android. So this is just a brief graph showing Meta's ad spend on iOS and Android. So you can see the huge jump in Android and also the drop of increase rates in iOS. And so this happened, still as said, the ad spend on iOS is kind of increasing, but the CPI is also increased. So at a certain point that the acquired user is kind of less. So in this chart, this is a very brief one showing the installs on Google Ads. Google platforms are increasing, but at the same time, the App Store has been decreasing if we compare year over year for the first half of 2021 to 22. And the impact over hyper-casual was a bit severe, to be honest. So if you can see this, so the arcade and casino, they have been monetized in a different way, but hyper-casual is quite linked to the downloads, and you can see the decrease in hyper-casual. So basically, it's a bit harder than to launch new games in this year. It's still not impossible. We think that, as I just mentioned, that the companies that have a good product focus, if they specifically have a, let's say, product gameplay, or they specialize in a certain subgenre or a mechanic, whatever you call, I think they're right now more valuable and more close to win than the ones that try mechanics or game types from a broader perspective. So we think that the product importance is much more focused than before. And so all of those things have a challenge in growth because the LTV profiles have extended. You monetize or you reach your payback in a more longer time frame. When this happens and you start to increase your UA, or even though you don't increase because of increasing CPI, you adjust anything else, so you actually generate less revenue on a certain time frame, let's say on a monthly basis or a quarterly basis, but you keep spending the same or maybe a bit high, and that has an impact on the margins. So everyone started to have an urgency to control their margins at the moment to keep the business going forward. So what we have seen that some publishers have taken measures to cut their fixed cost, you know, the stuff with the developers that have been happening for a time. So once they did, or once they were running a profitable business, is more able to compensate those short-term shrinks in the profit margins. But everyone values profit over growth at the moment, and it's just a, you know, a usual phenomenon when recession happens. So since that the growth is not valuable that much, so everyone is going to take measures to sustain their margins, or at some place that they don't burn cash anymore, or even they do, it's just a, let's say, an amount that they can find the capital, because both cost of capital have increased, so this is, then the reason it also impacts the valuation. So if you try to raise money, in this way it's more harder than before, and even if someone is willing to give money and you are still prioritizing margin and do not generate cash, it's actually more expensive than it used to be. And also coming from the scarcity, because, I mean, people right now, if they would like to be more on the safer side, so this type of risky investments became more, let's say, interesting for the most investors. And we expect the consolidation. So the first one is a vertical integration amongst specifically publishers going to acquire more developers, basically because of the margin control and to increase their production capabilities, specifically targeting studios that they tend to work in a better way, let's say, just to, from a portfolio management perspective, actually. So just to ditch the ones that they are not being able to find success. And for the horizontal growth for portfolio depth, I'm going to acquire other companies in the other genres just to increase the diversification of their portfolios, specifically because of the reason that it's a bit harder to operate when you have a low LTV and low CPI business, because you have to grow, you have to keep spending if you would like to sustain. It's not possible to, just as, I mean, so by the way, this chart you might have been familiar. I kind of tweaked it a bit from a chart that made by Eric Seufert, and I think it was presented in the Istanbul, the constructor of Fun Event. So this area is actually the casual business. So when it started with high engagement, high LTV, whatever, you know, I mean, you know the story. And then once hyper-casual extended, we have a spectrum. And hyper-casual is on this side, obviously. So as said, I mean, if you have a low ARPU, low CPI business, if you stop growing, it means that your business is constantly shrinking, and it's not resilience as a casual business does, because you can cut your spending and still collecting revenue from your existing users. The grass is not very greener on this side as well. I mean, the spending has been decreasing, but not at the same, let's say, amount as the drop in IAA. So this is why we think that we all have to find a way to, you know, operate within a tighter headroom for margin control, because of the reasons that I've just mentioned, and also combine with the growth challenges, because it's not easier to make hits, if, as said, if you're not specialized in a certain level. So here's the urgency of, I mean, finding a new solution how to do it. So as said, we coined the term with Sci-Play, actually. It's coming from the fact that two companies can integrate their distinctive capabilities. So what we think that there's a vision of business model that can combine the rapid prototyping culture and the finding interesting concepts, also combining it with very simple core gameplays to features from the casual mindset increases ARPU to a certain level, not directly competing with 100% IAP companies, but finding a sweet spot in between. So going back to the chart that I've just showed, so this is what we call the, let's say, the sweet spot valley of the correct IAP, IAA mix. So once you have the urgency of, you know, the push from everything else, you have to sustain your ARPU or whatever you earn in terms of revenue to compensate the increase in UA and CPI. So if you can combine those two features together, we think that there is a room for a sweet spot, and changes accordingly to the team's, let's say, core competencies. Some others are, you know, more good at building more IAP content. Some others are very, proficient in the core competencies of a hyper-casual team. And once they combine, we think that we should find a new sweet spot between both of those two worlds. So the key components is that thinking from a hyper-casual perspective. So 4 pillars. I mean, the first 2 is the hyper-casual core competencies. I mean, if you're a successful hyper-casual company, you have a good cycle of, finding a market, the concepts, or, having a good idea with high marketability, and then combine it a very repetitive and, interesting core gameplay. And you have a culture of doing this very fast, as specifically as compared to the production and execution timelines on the casual space. And so if you are able to do that, you're actually winning in the IAA business. So moving forward in those last 2 pillars, you start to build your IAP. So, though all of those ones are not genre specific, your simple and catchy core might come from hyper casual, or might come from a very, let's say, legacy casual mechanic. And then you build whatever layers in metagame to drive your engagement. That can be like item tiering, that can be a level progression, but the sense of progression for the user that has to remain there to keep them coming back in your game. And one of the most important key pillars here is the live ops, because this is what most of the hyper-casual studios lack, specifically within the development teams. And this is a key pillar, how to keep your IAP going forward, but not just doing a one-time win game. As said, all of those happening, they have to combine with a cycle of rapid prototyping and production that is, again, coming from the hyper-casual culture. So we think that the teams that have very good core competencies in the hyper-casual can have some sort of an initiative to combine all of those 4 pillars together to create a new business model. So a path to win, from our perspective, is that then again, a team that is very proficient in hyper-casual probably achieved some sort of a success. Success doesn't have to be, a profit or anything else, but have a good understanding and a solid background of how hyper-casual works and looking at it from a business model, but not only a product perspective. And we think that it has to be equipped with some sort of a know-how coming from the casual background. The way of doing that can be a partnership or can be an organic initiative, hiring those people, spending more money, or anything in between. If you have a publisher or a supporting party that can make you hire more people that have the same core capabilities, can work from our perspective. And how we approach this is actually combining our forces with SciPlay. As again, back early this year, we have been acquired by SciPlay, and SciPlay is again, one of the leading social casino companies, and they have extensive know-how in live ops, and specifically whole industry expertise on key players coming back to their games. They have been monetizing users for, more than 10 years or something like that, even users coming from Facebook. So once we see that opportunity, we think that our rapid prototyping, kind of expertise in developing hyper-casual games, specifically in certain genres like minigames and everything else, can be combined with this know-how of SciPlay to form a new platform. And then we have the access to talent. In Turkey, there's a great talent. We have an international reach at the moment. And we can use this platform to grow even more and expand more and do this in a portfolio management perspective. Alictus currently also have a portfolio management, let's say, approach, even in hyper-casual. We monetize games for a longer period of time as opposed to other conventional hyper-casual businesses. So we can also do that within this casual hyper business model that we generate. We don't look for a one-hit wonder, but it has to be a repetitive success, and you build it. It adds on when you add more titles, just to build a more legacy business. And our intention is to, from that point, is to grow both organically and inorganically. Organically meaning that we are on a hiring spree. We are constantly looking for the best talent in the market, as again, either in Turkey or international. Inorganically, we think that the market has to find new ways for partnerships, even though lots of publishers and companies, including us, trying to form a new innovative ways to inorganically grow through publishing or co-development or even acquisitions, equity hires, whatever you call. So our intention is to find those teams that we have a really good bond and we have a common mindset to work together, even those teams that have not achieved success yet, but have the winning mindset. So we are on the constant lookout for those good people to join us. And if you're interested in this, we're always here, whole team, and we have a booth on the, I think, main area, it's called. So come visit us or drop me an email to discuss more. If you have any questions for me, I'm here to answer. Cool. Thank you.